It was late when she said it, so quiet that even the glass seemed to lean closer to listen. The rain had just stopped, leaving Whitlock City breathing in mist. I stood by the kitchen doorway, her voice slipping through the thin air like steam. "Don't tell him it was me," she whispered, her back turned. Fingers still wet from washing a single cup. The cup wasn't mine, and it wasn't his either. It belonged to someone who hadn't been in this house for a long time. The walls glowed pale gold, reflecting her outline against the window. My father's car wasn't outside. He hadn't been home in 3 nights. There was no reason to whisper. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words caught in my throat. She dried her hands on the black-edged napkin and placed it carefully beside the sink, as if arranging evidence. "Some things," she said, "are truer when no one says them." I remember the ticking clock from the dining room, each second louder than the last, pressing time against our silence. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The house already knew. The next morning, she acted as though nothing had been said. Breakfast was neat, precise, everything measured: 2 slices of toast, 1 turned face down. My father called from Marin Point, his voice faint through static. "Is she there?" he asked. "She sounds tired." I said she was fine. I said nothing else. That afternoon, I found the cup she'd washed, hidden behind the hallway curtain. A pale crack running through its rim. The smell of burnt coffee still clung to it. She never hid things unless they mattered. The cup went missing by evening. So did the napkin. And when my father returned, he carried a yellow envelope in his hand, damp from rain. He looked at me once before climbing the stairs. He didn't ask about her. Didn't ask about the cup. He just said, "You heard something you shouldn't have, didn't you?" I didn't reply. Upstairs, the door closed softly. Then came the sound of glass shifting, of a drawer opening, of something fragile being placed carefully away. I waited until the house went still before whispering the words she'd told me to keep. "Don't tell him it was me." The echo folded into the walls like breath into frost. The next morning, her reflection was gone from the glass door, but her scent lingered, faint, familiar, and wrong. The cup reappeared on the table, filled with cold water, and beside it lay a single key wrapped in the same napkin. I turned it once in my palm. The metal left a thin line across my skin, pale gold in the morning light. Somewhere upstairs, the clock stopped at 6:13 again. And in that silence, I finally understood. Some confessions aren't meant to be spoken. They're meant to stain quietly, until the glass forgets who touched it first. The next evening, the house felt colder than usual. She'd stopped pretending that everything was fine. I could see it in the way she moved, slower now, like she was waiting for something to catch up with her. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the walls, stronger tonight, like it had been spilling for days. I found her in the kitchen again, wiping down the counter with too much pressure, the cloth almost tearing under her grip. Her eyes were distant, lost in a thought that didn't belong here. "You've been careful, haven't you?" I asked, the words tasting too sharp for the quiet. She didn't look up. "Careful?" she repeated, her voice low, controlled, as if she was calculating how to respond. "Careful about what?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She already knew what I meant. I could see the way her fingers hovered over the drawer, as if the contents inside were the only thing keeping her from disappearing entirely. The drawer opened with a soft click, too soft, and she took out the yellow envelope. The one my father had brought back from Whitlock Registry days ago. "I don't know why you keep looking at it," she said, but her voice faltered. She held the envelope in her hand, fingers trembling ever so slightly. Nothing in here will change what we've done. I stepped closer, not sure what I expected to find, only that I needed to understand. But the moment I reached for it, she pulled it away, stepping back, the movement quick. Defensive. You never asked, did you? She whispered, her eyes locking on mine with an intensity that caught me off guard. You never asked because you didn't want to know. But now you do, and it doesn't matter anymore. It's already done. The words hung between us like smoke. For a second, I could almost hear the clock ticking upstairs. But then the silence stretched again, broken only by the sound of the rain outside, tapping against the window like a warning. I wanted to believe you, I said quietly. But now I don't know what's real. She stared at me, her face softening into something unreadable. Then, as if it was a weight she could no longer carry, she set the envelope down on the counter and walked away. The sound of her footsteps faded into the hallway, leaving me alone with the silence that had been building for months. I stayed there, staring at the envelope, wondering how much she had kept from me. How much she had buried under layers of glass and gold thread. The napkin with its black edges had been folded inside the envelope, just like the key. But I didn't touch it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to see the truth. Not when it was wrapped in the kind of quiet I had come to fear. That night, I opened my window, just like I always did. But when I looked outside, there was no moon, no light to guide me. Only the rain, falling harder now, and the sound of a door closing upstairs, final, heavy. As though something had just ended, something I still didn't fully understand. The glass fogged up, and I wiped it away, but the reflection stayed blurry, unformed. And in the distance, I thought I heard her voice again, soft, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a scream. One that had been buried under layers of silence for far too long. The house settled deeper into its silence after that. She didn't speak unless she had to, and when she did, the words felt like they were carefully constructed, measured, clipped. I could hear the difference. The rhythm of our days became predictable. But the air between us thickened. It was as if the walls themselves had learned to hold their breath. I caught glimpses of her movements at odd hours, shadows shifting against the glass. Always just beyond reach. She had stopped wearing the yellow dress she used to wear when he was home, the one she claimed he loved the most. Now, she wore darker colors, as though she was trying to blend into the shadows instead of standing in the light. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the wooden surface. Her eyes followed the rain, as if she were waiting for something to change, to arrive. I never meant for you to see, she murmured, though I wasn't sure who she was speaking to. Her words never felt like they were meant for me. I didn't ask her what she meant, didn't push for the truth. I had learned long ago that silence was a far more reliable answer than anything she could say. Still, I couldn't stop watching the envelope, now resting on the edge of the counter. Its yellow seal broken. The flap was open just enough for me to see the corner of something inside. I wasn't sure if I was ready to see what she had hidden. But I couldn't stop myself from reaching for it, from pulling it closer. My fingers brushing over the thin paper. As I lifted the contents out, I saw the photograph first, a single image, black and white, of a woman I didn't recognize standing in front of a glass house. The same house, the same structure where my father's ghost seemed to linger. Where the silence felt louder than any conversation. I didn't know who she was, this woman in the photo, but I knew immediately that she had been there. that she had been with my father. The edges of the photo were worn, like it had been handled too many times. Its memory fading with each passing day. A piece of his past I had never been meant to know. The moment I held it, I heard her behind me, standing in the doorway. Her presence didn't surprise me anymore, it never did. But this time, there was something different about the way she looked at me. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was just empty. "You found it," she said, her voice calm, measured. But there was a tremor in her eyes, one I hadn't seen before. She looked away, then back at me, her mouth opening as though to speak but then closing. She didn't need to say anything else. "I never wanted you to know," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "But now you do. And it changes nothing. It never changes anything." I stood there, holding the photo in my hands. The silence between us stretched so far, I wasn't sure where it would end. There was nothing left to say. The door upstairs creaked open. My father was home. But I didn't look back at him. Not this time. I kept my eyes on the photo, the woman and the glass house in the background. It had always been there, lurking in the corners of this house, behind the walls. Behind the windows, behind every closed door. And now I knew, the truth was never hidden from me. It had just been waiting. Waiting for me to see it. I turned away and walked toward the window. The glass was cold against my palm, but it didn't feel like a barrier anymore. It felt like a reflection, something that had always shown me the truth. The photo slipped from my hand, falling softly onto the floor. I didn't pick it up. The sound of the door closing upstairs was final, distant. The silence held. I couldn't bring myself to pick up the photo, not then. Not after everything had already shifted into place. It was as if touching it again would make the truth too real, and the house, with all its hidden corners, already had enough reality to offer. The next few days passed like slow motion. I kept walking past the kitchen, past the table where the envelope had been. But now it was gone, along with the photo and everything else she'd tried to bury in it. The room was neat, untouched, but something was different in the air. As though the walls had learned how to watch me in return. She stopped speaking to me altogether. At dinner, she would sit across from me, eyes fixed on her plate. Always with a cold cup of coffee in front of her. Her hand never shook anymore, and her smile, when it appeared, was so practiced I couldn't tell if it was real or a reflection of something she had once been. I thought of the photograph, her photograph, and of the woman in it. I didn't know her name, but I knew she was part of something I hadn't been meant to see. It was like a door left open, and I couldn't turn back. The thought of my father brought me no comfort anymore. He was just as silent as the house. Just as quiet. On the fourth night after finding the photo, she came into my room. A silhouette against the pale gold light that spilled in through the window. I wasn't surprised, not anymore. She stood there, still, her hands at her sides, as if waiting for permission to speak. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice low, almost lost in the space between us. "But I did. And you can't undo it. No one can. You'll understand that one day." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. It wasn't the first time I had heard those words. Just like it wasn't the first time I had felt this weight in my chest, the one that told me to leave, to run, to get out before the house swallowed me whole. But I stayed. She sat on the edge of my bed, not close enough to touch, but close enough for me to smell the faint scent of her perfume. The one that lingered too long after the rain. I felt her presence more than I heard her. It was never just about him, she continued, her eyes distant now, as if she were speaking to someone else entirely. I needed something to call my own. Something that didn't belong to anyone else. But it was never meant to be this way. I didn't expect it to become this mess. The silence between us grew louder, swallowing her words before they reached me. I wasn't sure if she was still speaking to me or if she had lost herself in a memory. Some piece of the past she couldn't escape. I could hear my father upstairs, the faint sound of footsteps, of his movements. But he didn't come down. He didn't come for either of us. I stood up and walked to the window, opening it wide as I had every night before. But this time, the air felt different. It felt heavier. The city below was quiet, as it always was at night. But this time the silence didn't comfort me. It held something sharp in it, a warning I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. "You're not my mother," I whispered to the room. The words tumbling out before I could stop them. The truth felt like a burn on my tongue, but it had to be said. She wasn't my mother. She had never been. She didn't respond to that. She never did. Instead, she stood, her gaze focused on the empty space beside me, where the photograph had once been. "I never meant to be," she said softly, like it was a confession I wasn't supposed to hear. The clock ticked in the distance, distant but steady. The rain started up again, and I closed the window. The sound of droplets now louder than her words. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. I didn't have to. In the darkness, the house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break. But nothing did. Everything just stayed the same, silent, unspoken, frozen in the glass. The next morning, I woke to the faint sound of something shifting upstairs. It wasn't unusual. My father had come home late again, as he always did, but this time it felt different. I knew, deep down, that something was about to change. The house, with all its layers of glass and silence, had started to feel less like a home and more like a holding place, waiting for the inevitable. I moved downstairs, where she sat at the kitchen table, the same empty cup in front of her. She wasn't looking at me, not really. Her eyes were fixed on the window, where the mist still clung to the glass like a memory she couldn't shake. I stood there for a moment, just watching her, feeling the quiet stretch between us like a cord pulled too tight. I wanted to ask her everything, to demand answers that had been left hanging in the air for months. But the truth was, I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want to know how far the lies had gone, how deeply they had settled into the walls of this house, into my mind. I didn't want to confront the reality of what had happened, of what had been kept from me. "Do you ever think about leaving?" I asked, the question coming out of nowhere, but it felt right. It was the only thing I could say that felt honest, that felt real. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "Every day," she said, her voice almost too soft to hear. "But leaving wouldn't change anything. It would only make it worse." I didn't understand what she meant by that. I didn't understand how leaving could make it worse. But I didn't press her. I didn't want to. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly in the silence. A reminder of all the time we had spent avoiding the truth, of all the things we hadn't said. I turned away and walked toward the door, my hand on the cold brass knob. "I don't think I can stay here much longer," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if I meant it or if I was just trying to make a point. But the words felt true all the same. The house, the walls, the glass, it all felt suffocating now. Like it was closing in on me, and I didn't know how to breathe. "You don't have to stay," she replied quietly. "But if you leave, you'll never get it back." You'll never have the chance to make it right. I stopped at the door, my hand frozen on the knob. What does that even mean? I asked, turning back to face her. Her gaze met mine, calm and steady, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was resignation, as if she had already accepted that there was no way back from what had happened. It means, she said softly, that some things can't be undone. Some things are meant to stay broken. And then she stood up, the sound of her chair scraping against the floor too loud in the stillness. She walked past me without a word, her steps slow, deliberate. I watched her go, the space between us growing wider with each step. When she reached the staircase, she paused, her hand resting on the banister. Without turning around, she spoke one last time. You're just like him, she said, her voice barely a murmur. You'll leave, and you'll never look back. And with that, she disappeared up the stairs. The house once again settling into its unnatural stillness. I stood there for a long time, my fingers still gripping the cold knob. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know how to leave, or if I even could. But I knew one thing, the house had already changed me. The silence, the glass, the reflection of what had been hidden for so long, it had seeped into my bones. And I realized, as I turned away from the door and walked back toward the kitchen, that I wasn't sure I could ever leave. Because the truth was, I was already a part of this house. Just as much as she was. Just as much as my father had been. The past, the secrets, the lies, they had already wrapped themselves around me, and now they were all I knew. I didn't look back at the table, at the empty cup, at the place where the photograph had once been. Instead, I walked toward the window and opened it, just a crack, letting the wind rush in. The house might have been suffocating me, but out there, beyond the glass, there was still air. There was still a world I couldn't touch. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.